Okay, so this is going to be the Q&A that we were supposed to do like a month ago, but oh well.
Happy very belated birthday podcast.
Yeah. Do you want that to be the start or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's
We're going apparently. Hello,
we
everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Q&A session. So for anyone unawares, we've been doing this little podcast called Mythological for 5 years as of last May, a month ago.
As of this May.
This May, sorry. And we thought it would be fun to celebrate the occasion by doing a little bit of a Q&A for just generally any fans, for patrons, etc., who just had any questions at all about how we do the podcast, our wider thoughts on mythology. And luckily for us, you folks delivered and came through. We got about 30 questions or so we're going to go through. And we'll try and shout out the people who gave us these questions in the process. I have not tried to organize these in the slightest, so it's probably going to be a complete mess.
That's nothing new.
Yeah, I've tried to get rid of like repeat questions and summarize down stuff. So yeah, let's just get started. So first question.
Introduce ourselves.
Oh, yeah,
We've not said our names. Hi, I'm Cassie.
I doubt that someone is listening to a Q&A on a 5-year-long podcast like celebration who doesn't know who we are.
True.
But hi, you're Cassie.
Yep, so I'm told.
Yeah, I'm Charles. And let's get going. So the first question comes to us from Zar9499. I often picture the recording of the podcast taking place in front of a low-burning fireplace, posh chairs around a good dark wood table with the mics in front of the chairs, and you all sitting at the table discussing the subjects, maybe a pipe to add to the sophistication of the area. Am I close on your setup for the recording or way off? You are way off.
We are not that classy.
No, we are in a dank office on the third story of a random terrace house, surrounded by audio foam on a cheap IKEA table that is horribly pockmarked because I also use it to paint stuff on. So
there's a few Warhammer models around,
yeah,
just to add to the ambience.
There's like stacks of random papers that are supposed to be in files and organized that I haven't dealt with. Yeah, so we tend to just throw together our recording area each time. There's nothing fancy at all about it in the slightest. And if we tried to record this last week like we were going to, it also would have been horribly sweltering. So you could claim that's like a low-burning fireplace if you want.
A high-burning planet.
Yeah. Oof. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. We are not classy in the slightest. Although we are Cassie.
Yes, well, I am.
Yeah. Okay, next question comes from Lame Chiao. Apologies if that's not how you wanted that said. Hi, huge fan of the podcast. Thank you very much. Used to listen to these to fall asleep, and I'm not kidding when I say that no other podcast measures up. I'm going to cautiously take that as a compliment. I only vaguely know of Q Cullen from Fate/Grand Order, which I believe...
It's an anime.
It's an anime,
I remember Fate
I thought it was a
Stay
video
Night.
game for a second.
I think it's both. It's a whole franchise.
Oh,
I remember
no.
Fate Stay Night, but not the Grand Order.
I want to ask, how many hours of research do you think you do on average per episode, with each episode of a multi-part one counting individually? So we had a bit of a think about this because it tends to vary, obviously. Some topics are more like complex, trying to get our heads around than others. Probably the lowest end one, personally for me, was when we did the Japanese creation myth one. Well, more specifically, Amaterasu. And in that case, I was literally just writing out a bunch of myths without a great deal of critical like commentary or anything. So I think that probably only took me about 10 hours total to do my section. I would say that there's like some of the high-end stuff. If we're taking it in terms of like individual parts on big episodes, I would say that like part one of Bigfoot probably took me somewhere between 50 to 60 hours of reading, like trying to find actual accounts, reading through them, trying to critically assess them, look up critical commentary, and digest it all down into a way that's vaguely interesting to listen to. I would say that's usually what the kind of the upper end is for me personally.
Yeah, Bigfoot was definitely one of the larger ones for me. I used fairies as my example as sort of the upper end, because I remember doing like 2 hours a day over a month for that, so working out at around 65 hours. Robin Hood is one of my lower end ones because, yeah, I basically had all the stories ready and set up for me because I took the later side of the Robin Hood mythos. That one I did in a single week of about 5 hours a night.
Yeah.
So splitting the difference, 35 to 65, 50 hours sounds about right for the average.
You didn't have to dive into like the criminal records reports and stuff like that to see where Robin Hood first appeared as a name. etc.
I
Although, to be
had
fair,
two
neither did I.
I had 2 books which compiled everything. It was great.
Okay, moving on. Love this podcast. Oh, wait, that's from Ouroboros. Love this podcast for the Q&A. What has been your favorite ancient text like the Iliad or Beowulf? And if it's different, which, in your opinion, has been the best written?
Firstly, lovely pun name, Ouroboros.
Yes.
I love that so much.
Pun worthy of us when naming shows.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed Ovid's Metamorphoses, if I'm forced to pick one. In our Heracles episode, it didn't really add anything in terms of new content that wasn't already covered by Pseudo-Apollodorus or Diodorus Siculus, but I included sections of it because I really enjoyed the dramatic flair they brought to it. So I put a few quotes down that just really illustrate that, like Heracles boasting with, "It was the pastime of my cradle days to strangle greater serpents than thee," or describing the Hydra as outbranching with strong serpents, sprung from death and thriving on destruction. And it really brought the stories to life. So yeah, I think that's my answer for that one.
Yeah, wow, you actually went and looked up like stuff. I'm just like, so instinctively my brain wants to say the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's not really true though, because when I first read the Epic of Gilgamesh, I read like a Victorian rewriting of it that made it into much more of a conventional literary tale. And if you actually try and read the direct translations of the tales, they're a lot harder to understand, especially the old Babylonian version of it. I instinctively would say something like the Iliad or the Odyssey. Probably the Iliad because I just like some of the repeated phraseology it uses that you can kind of see the kind of oral roots of where they're having to have these repeated devices to help jar the memory of where I am in telling the tale. Yeah, so that's probably my answer. Next one is by Mac Lamont. Hi, Charles and Cassie. Do you have any plans to do an episode about Australian myths / folklore? Possibly the bunyip, the mould. Oh, this is a disaster. Muldjuwanga.
I don't think we're covering that one because we can't say it.
It ends with a K, so I'm struggling. Or even just the Dreamtime creation myths in general. Thanks for everything. The show is my favorite podcast. Oh, well, thank you. The answer to most of the cases when people ask, are you going to do something about this, is probably yes. I think when it comes to things like Australian myths, we're going to have to be quite careful because obviously we want to make sure we're actually using sources that reflect general Aboriginal myths rather than, to put it crudely, some white guy in the 19th century.
Yeah, I have the same feeling. And that this also covers Frill House's question on Australian folklore as well.
Frill House. Yeah.
Things coming up, Frill House.
Yeah.
So yeah, because Australian mythology came up briefly in Dragons all the way back at the beginning. I do not feel I even remotely began to do that justice back then.
Yeah, our sources back then were not the greatest.
Yeah, so I want to make sure I can take the time to get a lot of general background reading in. Same with other indigenous cultures like Native American cultures, as there's a few questions about that later on. A lot of it's going to be distorted, like we say, by the colonizers. And I want to make sure that we do it right and handle it respectfully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what she said. By Science YT. Hey, Charles and Cassie, have you ever thought of doing an episode on the wild man of Europe, European and a few outside Europe's folklore? This podcast is great, and it's the only one I ever really listened to. Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, the wild man is one where I've always been kind of aware of it a little bit. I don't know a huge amount of specifics. I know that there was, I think it was Charles VII of France had an infamous event. I think it might have been called the Banquet of Fools, where he and some of like his other noble comrades dressed up as wild man for like a lark. And unfortunately, they ended up getting accidentally set on fire. And I think everyone except the king died. So not a great tale to have as your starting point.
No, but you have piqued my interest there.
But there's definitely something interesting there to go and have a look at. Because at first I was thinking when I read this question, is there actually enough there to do a dedicated episode? And I went away and had a look, and I think, yeah, there probably is the answer. We'll have to have a think about that one.
Yeah, that's one to consider, I think.
Because at first I was thinking, it might be like the Green Man, where that's not actually as folkloric a figure as I think as people like to think. In like you see the Green Man as a figure that's often like carved on churches and stuff like that. And from what I remember, I don't think there's quite enough to do like a full episode on the Green Man, for example. But the Wild Man might well be.
Maybe one day.
Yeah. Johann Jartelius, I'm guessing that's how it's supposed to be pronounced. Hello, Charles and Cassie. I'll throw a few questions in the hat. How did you both get into folklore? I'm going to go one by. We'll answer each one in turn for this. How did you both get into folklore? Just general reading and kind of being in the UK. If you try and go anywhere that like has a placard up about the place, you're probably going to find some folklore at the end of the day. Like there's a place that is like a bit of a drive away from where I am called the Cow and Calf Rocks near Ilkley. And I remember like that's one of the earliest legends. I remember where there's like they got like a legend about a giant called Roland or something. Who the reason why it's called the Cow and Calf Rocks is like there's a big rock formation and one like big glacial rock off to the side. And one theory is that this giant, it might have been Rombald might have been his name, or Roland, but he basically like went running away from his angry wife over something he'd done, and he stood on the rocks and he split the calf rock off from the cow rock, for example. So that's like one of the earliest ones that I can remember. And yeah, just naturally kind of flowed from just encountering it in the wild around the UK, I would say, for me.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. I think for me it was just always having a love of stories of any kind, and like I was taught, I learned about Greek and Egyptian mythology in primary school, elementary school for Americans, and that fed into like wider interest in mythology. And as I discovered more stories, more local folklore as well. So yeah, give me stories, I will devour them, basically.
Next question. Has your view on what folklore is changed in some way as you've been digging deeper into the field? I think, I don't want to be mean here, but like one thing I've kind of come to accept is that as someone who came from a background of like hard science, you have to be a bit more lenient in how evidence is judged in folklore. But there is still a habit, I think, from a lot of authors of just kind of throwing stuff out there and saying, oh, these two events that are widely separated by space and time are actually definitely connected and influenced each other. Or saying, I have 5 stories from this 500-year span, therefore there is a coherent tradition of this folkloric strand going through it all. And I'm like, no, you've got 5 stories is what you've actually got, and they could be 100-something years apart in the other side of Europe from one another. So, as I say, you've got to be a little bit more like lenient with folklore on an academic level, just because we don't have the density of evidence that a lot of the more empirical fields have. But that was something I wasn't as aware of, that often a lot of assumptions seem to me to be faulted, to be like founded on very dodgy foundations.
Yeah, and similar to that, I guess, it builds on my previous answer of I will devour stories if I can read them. Then bringing that sort of younger attitude into older me with my science background, very much questioning where the stories came from or what might have distorted the versions of the stories that I get. So I've learned more to understand the lens that they're being viewed through. Mm-hmm. And so that has really, really helped a lot with the podcast, even as sometimes I've read a story later and gone, oh, that kind of ruins it now. It's less fun. But it's really interesting to be able to do that.
Yeah. Last question from Johan. What has been the most challenging thing about running a pod? What has been the most rewarding? I would say the most challenging thing has been showing up to actually record it on time, because we both get distracted by our own projects, work, and life outside of this. Most rewarding is actually having a deeper understanding of what I've kind of had not appreciated when we started. I think when we started, I had actually quite a surface level understanding of a lot of myths, and this has really made me step up my game in understanding them.
I think I just have to say what he said for that one. Yeah. You have summed it up perfectly there.
Unless you want to say da money. Yeah.
The day job is for the money.
Yeah. Carmilla Plumsmaster 8792 asks, what's been your favorite topic / episodes to do research on, and why? My answer is very short and simple, and it's Bigfoot, because I just really like Bigfoot. And I'd read a lot of the actual accounts in the past just from being a kind of believer at some point early on, and revisiting them with a more skeptical eye and more scholarly input from it, like certain people who've looked at them, was very, very fun.
For me, also a simple answer, yokai, because I love Japanese folklore and there's such a huge variety of fun creatures to read about and learn about.
Cool. John McBaseball, which I've listed here as the most American name in history.
I'm picturing the guy from Yu-Gi-Oh! With the American flag bandana. In America.
Hey, Charles and Cassie, one of my favorite segments of the podcast was your covering of Native American myths during the Bigfoot episode. Having considered making any episodes on Native American folklore, thank you and keep up the good work. Yep, thank you. I think it's very much going to be our answer about the Aboriginal stuff again, and it's one of those where I think we need to actually, for people who are unaware, we have like a Patreon vote to select the next topic now, where people like pick from a selection of different options. And I think we need to make more of an effort to put Native American myths on that, because it occurs to me, I don't think we've actually put it on for a vote at any point yet. So that probably needs to be bumped up.
Yeah. I think we should do a bit of preparing before we put it on a poll as well, just so we are ready for that answer to win when it goes on the poll.
Declan Leach asks 2 questions. What are each of y'all's research processes, and what resources, online or otherwise, would you recommend for those interested in doing similar research? So, I'll let you go first on this one, Cassie, because I've been answering everything first.
So the research process very much depends on the episode. For me, so if it's like a narrative of a hero or a god or creation myth, then the first thing I will do is go for the primary sources. So Pseudo-Polydorus' Bibliotheca for Heracles, the pyramid texts for Osiris, things like that. A lot of them are available for free on places like Gutenberg, Internet Archive, or Sacred Texts.
What's the one which begins with a P as well? It's got all the Greek ones on.
Perseus something
like that. You can get most of the original Greek texts on that.
Yeah, that was a really useful resource as well. From there, I go into scholarly sources which have analysis or books by experts. Like there was a biography of Heracles that we used a lot, which really helps sort of tie things together and fill in gaps from the original sources.
It's usually a good practice, I find, to see if there is like, it's good to have a look around. Like you can look at like places like r/ask historians and stuff like that. See, is there considered like a single authoritative like account of the subject that you want? And sometimes that has been helpful for us, and it helps. And then those will also often reference other like scholars and their opinions, and you can usually bud off from there. When it's more difficult for us is when those don't exist. As we found, we're about to record a podcast on werewolves after this, and we were really struggling because there isn't like a single coherent academic overview of the subject.
Yeah, that has been difficult today. Yeah, sometimes I do have to start with those academic overviews when it's something more scattered, like yokai or Anansi. So we had like the Book of Yokai or Anansi's Journey by Emily Zobel Marshall. And we go into their bibliographies for more detail, because the important thing with these sources is checking their credentials, making sure that they are as authoritative on the subject as they claim to be.
You also should like be willing to kind of have your own ideas, I think, about the topic, even if you're not an expert. If what the expert is saying to you doesn't seem to make basic logical sense or is based on the evidence and feels more like they're moving the evidence around to match their theory rather than the other way around, then you should be willing to be a bit dubious about that.
Yeah.
I would also recommend I know a lot of people recommend going to Wikipedia and looking at the sources on a topic on its subject page. I would recommend you don't limit yourself to those sources, because often they can be quite out of date. They can sometimes it can really vary depending on who wrote the article, like how much they've done a job of cherry picking stuff from there. Sometimes they can be reliable and helpful, but I just want to say don't limit yourself to just those.
Yeah. If you're on those kind of Wikipedia pages with older articles, a lot of like scholarly sites will have things that say authors that cited this article, which is really good if you've got an older source that is probably going to have been debunked since then, and you can find the authors that have said, actually, this is wrong. Yeah,
don't rely on anything on folklore that comes from the 19th century. Like, double check it with a more modern source. And Declan Leach also asks, what are each of your thoughts on the importance of keeping old myths alive? Obviously good. Keep them going, because like, not only are they interesting stories in and of themselves that can enrich people's lives, but they also, I think, are one of the few remaining lenses that we have to see the actual thoughts and concerns of regular people. Like, well, not just regular people, but like certain cultures within history, because we don't have that time machine. We can't go and ask them. And this is one of the closest resources we have to seeing like how the ancient Greeks understood the world and things like that.
Yeah. And with cultures that are still surviving, but particularly ones that in places that have been colonized, it's important that those worldviews are preserved. We We want to be able to see perspectives that would have been lost if more dominant cultures has had their way. And I feel that keeping the myths alive from those cultures is a very important way of doing that.
Renee Grace, I'm guessing that's how it's supposed to be said. Rain Grace, alternatively, 7045 asks, will you ever cover Yggdrasil? I think is that how it's pronounced?
Yggdrasil.
Yeah, Yggdrasil, sorry. Or any Norse mythology. I always struggle with what the Y's mean in Norse, in Old Norse. Yeah, sure, is the honest answer. Like, we kind of touched on it nearly with Beowulf.
Yeah, it came up a bit in Beowulf.
Came up a little bit in Dragons.
Yep, and I'm
well.
going to be mentioning some of the sagas in Werewolves when we record that in about an hour's time.
Yeah.
Loki and Ragnarok was on the latest poll, and that
didn't win.
Didn't win. We'll be back up in a future poll when we get to that sort of theme next time around.
There will be regular Norse stuff going on those polls. It's just I haven't won out so far. Frill House asks, what does your workflow look like during a typical day of research? Personal request here too, feel free to disregard, but Indigenous Australian folklore is super interesting and definitely worth looking into. If you're interested, yeah, sure, we covered that earlier. My workflow is a complete disaster. Like, I often will bounce between looking up materials, reading materials, like just writing random notes and stuff like that, and just a various maelstrom until I realize, oh God, there's a deadline coming and I have to start actually writing stuff in order, because I just don't get stuff done unless I sit down and write a script out in order, it turns out.
Yeah, I try and do a section at a time. So like using fairies as the example, because I had two very distinct things. I focused entirely on Wales for a portion of the research, got all of that read, written, sourced, and then moved on to Scotland, or possibly the other way around. I forget. It was a while ago.
If left to my own means, I can't do that. I have to bounce back and forth and around. But I eventually, the looming deadlines are always good, it turns out for me. Vikingu4871 asks, will you cover any South American or African mythological creatures like you did in the Fae episode? What's your favorite game, franchise, and why? Plan on any collab? Oh, okay. I'll start with the first one then. Will you cover any South American or African mythological creatures? The answer is yes. We obviously would love to do that at some point. There might be some in the second part of the werewolves episodes that we're going to be doing. Might be something from Africa in that case. But I need to look further into that. We're only doing the first part in our recording at the moment. Cassie?
Yeah, I am looking into different topics that I can cover in Folklore and Superstition as well. So smaller things than maybe fairies. But I am very much trying to cover things that we've not been able to cover in Mythological for that series. So there will definitely be South America and Africa in there. I'm sort of trying to go around the world with it a bit. So.
What's your favorite game franchise? That's really difficult for me because I have like several. I play way too many games.
I have an easy answer. The most basic answer ever, Zelda.
Yeah, I could have told you that.
Yeah. I could have just let you answer that for me.
Yeah. I'm one of those like guys who has like annoying contrarian answers. Like I could say Zelda because I played most of the Zelda games. I could have said Mass Effect back in the day. I quite liked those. Although replaying them, like they're good, but not like top tier like stuff for me anymore. The real contrarian old PC gamer of me wants to say the Ultima series.
I was fully expecting Pathologic there.
I don't know, like Pathologic, because there's only 2 games in Pathologic, so I wouldn't necessarily call it like a franchise, but it's like, I'd say Pathologics are the games that I'm most, like, I have the most respect for what their vision is in them.
Go watch Charles's Pathologic video.
Oh yeah, for anyone who's not aware, I made a video about the second Pathologic game on a side channel called Histotrash, so check that out. Do you plan on any collabs? So we generally don't, like, we've generally avoided the idea of doing collabs for this just because it's hard enough to organize with the 2 of us because we have our own lives to kind of rotate around this, and also then having a third, all our friends are also disasters, so they would also, I think, struggle to turn up on time.
The disaster people just flocked together, it turns out.
We are going to be doing something else in the next month or so, though, that's not on mythology, but I think it's going to be more on like weird history or weird, like, could be weird myths or something, or just weird subjects, which will probably be involving Byron Lewis, who's done a couple of videos on the Histocrat channel with me as a guest and is now basically a professional Dexter YouTuber, as far as I can tell. But he's going to be doing more stuff other than that. But look out for that in probably late July. It'll probably be coming out. Might be a video thing that we might do it on camera. We're not sure at the moment. We'll see what we have available. Mountain Mowie 2726 asks, how do you decide which topics to cover? Have you ever started researching or even recording and then realized a topic just wasn't going to work? This is a multi-part one again, so we'll start off with the first one. I'll reread the others. How do you decide which topics to cover? What we basically do, because it's now decided by a Patreon vote, but we kind of stack the deck to some extent by just picking the topics that we would be interested in doing right now. But we try either to have it themed. So we had one where it was like, which one do you want, Q Cullen or Finn McCool, like in Irish mythology, to fight one-on-one? And then they drew. And then on other occasions, we've also tried to split things up like a bit and like have multiple different, like a variety pack of things, either in terms of different mythical creatures or just from different cultures around the world.
Yeah, we try and theme things like gods or heroes or cryptids, but
or monsters
it varies a bit on how we decide a poll.
Have you ever started researching or even recording and then realized the topic just wasn't going to work?
Actually, I think there's one where we did decide it wasn't going to work. We changed things around and just abandoned it afterwards because we were going to do the Greek fates.
Yes,
and we were both struggling, and then we got the sponsorship from the Japanese company and moved yokai up to get the sponsorship, and just the idea of doing fates just sort of fell off because we decided it wasn't really.
I don't think it was substantial enough for the style that we end up doing now. I'd completely forgotten about that, so thank you for that. How did you and Cassie decide to work together? You have such great chemistry as hosts. Oh, well, thank you. So we've known each other for an embarrassingly long time.
Yeah, we've been friends since we were 18. We are somewhat older than 18 now.
We're getting worryingly close to having known each other longer than we did not know each other.
Oh, God. No, I'm definitely only 25.
Yeah, we are.
Don't believe anyone who says differently. We're 25.
I was quite happy. I did a video on camera for his Scratch channel, and someone said on that, "Oh, you look way younger than you sound." I was like, "Oh, well, thank you." I'm at the age where I need that sort of reassurance. But yeah, we've just known each other for a real long time. Is probably why we have good chemistry. How do you decide to work together? Well, basically, I'd just been made redundant, and I was deciding to launch like something to supplement videos I was making on the Histocrat channel, and I thought podcasts would be good. And Cassie, you'd previously floated the idea of doing something like myth related. You came up with the title. So.
Yeah, because I really liked the format of podcasts where it is like two friends with a special interest who research things. So like My Favorite Murder and This Podcast Will Kill You. And that sort of informed the pitch that I gave to Charles at that point. Because, the channel was becoming quite successful. Yeah. And you wanted to capitalize on that. And I wanted to sort of get into the same sort of recording and
business.
get into the biz.
Yeah.
Never saying that again.
So hopefully that answers that question. Equinox Omega 3600, 3600. Have you ever considered doing an episode on the mythological... Well, okay. Have you ever considered doing an episode on the mythologicalization of real historical events? Essentially how a popular narrative of historical events increasingly overshadows the detailed facts of them. This is often in conjuncture with national myths, e.g. the founding myth of the USA. So trying to avoid being too controversial for the sake of it about this one. I think that might be a bit on the theoretical side. Like that might be more like the work of an actual scholar and theorist there. We maybe could give a dumbed down version of it if we were to cover that. It is an interesting thing though. We were talking about how even in like recent history, you can look at popular figures who were thought of one way whilst they were alive. And now that they're slowly becoming historical persons, they're starting to like have different memories almost imposed upon them of what they did. Like I think the example we were talking about is something like how like Martin Luther King is like widely considered a positive figure in the US now. And a lot of people always kind of remember him as having been that. But at the time, he was like one of the most hated men in America. Like when he was assassinated, he was a widely hated person by white America. So, it's, and then to some extent, people like Malcolm X as well from that period. There's also been kind of this whitewashing as to what their actual politics were. Like everyone will like dumb down Martin Luther King down to just like the I have a dream speech and ignore things like he was kind of like in favor of reparations and things like that, and kind of used to serve their own narratives as a result.
I think mythologizing those kind of recent events is a bit out of our usual remit.
Yeah.
So like when I looked at the question, I thought of the times we had talked about much more older historical
that's
figures
probably what
or
they're actually.
events.
That's probably what they're actually going
I mean, founding of the USA is more recent than what I was thinking, and there is obviously a lot of national mythology around that.
Mm.
Whereas I thought of stuff like we talked about the deification of Genghis Khan, who became quite important in Mongolian version of Buddhism as the incarnation of Vajrapani, if I remember rightly. Or the myths about the founding of Rome, because I confirmed that Rome existed a few months ago. I went there, I checked.
Yeah.
It was definitely founded.
We have the results of your investigative report.
We know that that's a historical event, but we only know Romulus and Remus story or Prince Aeneas of Troy story from Virgil.
It was the same story, like the actual story of how Rome was founded is the same story of almost every city in the world, which is that it was just a bunch of small settlements in a region that was like favorable to live in. That slowly grew in population and eventually joined up and became a bigger settlement. That's generally the overview. Like it started in the Bronze Age is Rome, rather than the kind of Iron Age timeline of the historical, like the pseudo historical myth of the founding of Rome.
But then that did very much become a national myth, as it were, and so to explain Rome's superiority and why it deserved to be the head of the seat of the empire.
Yeah,
so it does sort of fit with the idea of the founding of the USA as well.
Yeah, there might be more to this sort of thing than I had initially thought, and I'm starting to answer the question. But we'll have a think about the one. Basically, I think it is right to say though. I think the founding of the USA is increasingly becoming mythologized. Like I think there's increasingly a tendency to see the founding fathers as gods, like rather not gods, but like infallible figures who. You know, this was their perfect vision of what they wanted, when it's quite clear, even from like the very beginning, that they thought that the Constitution should be updated and things like that fairly regularly. Like, yeah, it's one of those, and also like the idea of like trying to whitewash away things like a lot of them were slaveholders and things like that, and just being like, oh, well, it was just at the time, and it's like, no, there were people like George Washington literally had to like cycle slaves in and out of places where he was serving as president so that the local laws didn't emancipate them. People were like against this stuff at the time. So that's kind of one of the aspects where I think that particular myth gets whitewashed. But we talked about this one for quite a while.
Yeah, that was a big tangent.
It was a good question though. It sparked a bit of a debate. Sweet Blazing Chronic 9, what a name. What stories or characters in your research of various myths and folklore did either of you relate to the most, or something you read that affected you on a personal level and maybe gave you a different perspective on life? You want to answer that, Cassie?
I actually don't think I have a good answer for that one. I'm not sure. That's a bit too open-ended for me to really get my head around.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because the problem with like mythical figures is they're often quite one-dimensional. A lot of the time, the example of Heracles, he just kind of is really strong from the start, and yeah, stuff happens, but often stuff happens to him that like is personal setbacks, but it's often instigated by someone else, like Hera, or who's the guy he does all the labors for.
Oh my god, I've forgotten his name.
Should have answered that. Shouldn't have asked that question.
It's been a few years.
Yeah. I really struggle to like get personally affected by myths, because I don't see them as characters in the way that you would like a novel, for example, where you like get a vision into the person's innermost thoughts. That's kind of a more modern creation, is the idea that you hear the thoughts of the person and not just like maybe a quick summary of like, he thought this, therefore do this. So yeah, I find it really hard to relate to the stories of characters in myths and folklore, because they're usually not developed that much.
Yeah. I think the only time I said anything on the podcast of I can relate to this person was the guy who's still hunting Nessie after 30 years. And I was like, That's relate. A real person, though. I can relate to this guy of wanting to go and search for a monster and sort of have his quiet little life by the lock.
Although now that I'm thinking about it, I can say like I think Gilgamesh's grief at the death of Enkidu is a good example of that. Like it's a very naturalistic portrayal of like what someone in their grief throes would go through, and the ends that a superhuman character would go to in that case to try and overcome death as a result. Yeah, so maybe that one.
And I've just thought of the less serious answer. Maybe Medusa, be nice to go to the edge of the world and just turn to stone anyone who wants to come and bother me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't have a more serious answer for that one. It's a difficult one for me.
Umbra Arcturus asks, given the choice, what lost piece of history or mythology would you most want to know the truth / details about history and or mythology? I don't really have a good answer for mythology.
We have another question to read for that. That's the same.
Oh, yes.
So we're covering everyone.
Yeah. Oh, and also there's another question by Anonymous Error 7417 that's basically the same question. But I thought it'd be nice to read them anyway. Thank you, Cassie and Charles, for years of amazing entertainment and mythology. What mythology mystery or question would you most wish to be solved? There's a few like Greek mystery festivals that I would quite like to know what the actual rituals involved. I think those would be cool. In terms of like lost piece of history, I would like to know what was actually going on during like the Bronze Age collapse, the late Bronze Age collapse in the Eastern Mediterranean, where, for context, anyone doesn't know, basically the Mycenaean palatial culture collapsed alongside the Hittite Empire, the Egyptian dynasty of the time, and to some extent the Assyrians as well. And the exact causes are quite complex and not as well understood. It's probably a lot of factors that actually caused it. But it would be nice to see if things like, were the sea peoples actually real, or were they just made up by a pharaoh who wanted to compare himself to his predecessors who had also claimed to have fought similar peoples?
For me, for mythology, I'd love to know if Cernunnos, the antlered figure that is seen in various artworks and is thought to be a Celtic god from mainland Europe, whether he was truly a single figure that was part of a wider Celtic pantheon, and what he represented, if so. Because like his name only appears in one Latin inscription that is so faded, we can't even be certain that the 18th century sources describing it are even accurate, and we can't be sure if all the depictions that we group together as being Cernunnos are intended to be the same figure. So I would love to know whether that is a true god that was believed in by the Celtic peoples of Europe. For history, I guess the period of Japanese history that we only have like scatters of Chinese writing on from Chinese envoys. So the period that the Japanese mythology says was around Emperor Jimmu and the foundation of Japan. I'd love to know more about the tribes that made up Japan in that time before they came together under the Yamato.
Which mythological episode was the most interesting in both your opinions to create? So we kind of see that as a little different from the earlier one, which was fun, where someone asked which was the most fun. I would say probably the most interesting to me was the Wild Hunt episode, because realizing that we kind of disagreed with the central idea that's presented in a lot of culture and by a lot of folklorists, we basically didn't buy the case that they were making. Don't think that's really happened for anything else that much, has it?
No, that's why Wild Hunt's my answer as well. Because when I pitched that one to you, I had so many preconceptions.
Yeah, same.
They were all just completely shattered. I had this idea of a neat narrative to tell. It just wasn't there. And it was really good to find out what actually made that up. Yeah.
Oh, we didn't actually say who asked that question. Exarchum9181 was the person who asked. Ellie Bumb 2377 asks, could you cover the Phoenix? Yeah, sure. Like, there is plenty there to talk about. Like, there's imagery of the sunbird is a very common one throughout the world. Like, the oldest one I know of goes back to Neolithic China. I think it's the Hermudu culture. It has examples of like bowls and like dagger hilts that have what appear to be birds with sun motifs attached to them. So I'm pretty certain that there is plenty to talk about there. It's just whether people want to vote for it when we put it on a poll at some point.
Yeah, you've covered everything.
Yeah,
to say there. I have nothing to contribute to that one. Charles has covered it all.
Okay, this is interesting. Carter to her asks, favorite fictional mythology in any media? I'm going to be annoying and say Pathologic, the kin from those games, but trying to think of like wider.
Obvious and basic answer, Tolkien's Legendarium.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Like, yeah, in terms of books, no one has put that much effort before or since into mythology.
I quite like the idea in the Assassin's Creed games. I don't know how far they went with this because I only played up until like Assassin's Creed 2 Brotherhood or whatever it's called. But there's like this idea, and spoiler warning if anyone wants to play those games, there's like discovering that like the biblical narratives are sort of like of the Old Testament are kind of true, but the people who like did it were like this advanced super race of like aliens or something, or like a precursor. I'm not sure if they're actually aliens, like a precursor civilization to the humans who were destroyed by like a natural disaster. And like the Garden of Eden stuff was like humans stealing technology from them rather than the stealing of knowledge, like the Tree of Knowledge thing. That's kind of interesting as well. Any chance you'll do an episode on the Mapuche creation myth? I apologize if I said that wrong. Mapuche by Super Sag. Super Sag. Yeah. Yeah, sure. It's the honest answer for that one. Like, again, all the caveats of what we said the previous ones of like, want to be careful with those type of myths and how to present them correctly. This one's purely for you, Cassie, so I'll let you read this one out.
So Christian4527 says, did you learn anything interesting locally when you lived in Japan, Cassie? Have you put these things that you've learned into any episodes yet? Charles can answer too, if he likes, but as you said,
I got nothing.
Too much interesting stuff to cover in answer to a question. So I'll say one thing that made it into a previous episode and one that will hopefully make it into Folklore and Superstition. While I was there, I learned about the rituals for the winter solstice, so Chinkonsai and Ninamesai, which to this day the emperor performs to strengthen his connection to Amaterasu, the queen of the gods, and to bring prosperity in the year ahead. And the ritual of Kannamesai, the harvest festival at Ise Jingu, which I wasn't able to see, unfortunately. I had to move my trip to the spring, but Ise is a beautiful place. Go visit it anyway. I also spent a lot of time in Okinawa, learned that the Ryukyu Islands have their own equivalent of yokai called Majimun. The most famous example is the Kijimuna, small humanoid spirits which live in trees, and I do want to talk about those in Folklore and Superstition when I get to covering Japanese stuff.
My really ignorant random guy who knows Japan through 4 pieces of media he has consumed thing sounds kind of like the guys from Princess Mononoke in the forest.
That's a different thing. We did talk about those in yokai.
Oh, we did. Yeah, I just forget things that happened more than 40 minutes ago. Honebrood, that's an interesting name, asks, which has been the most difficult episode to research for?
So mine for that, I think, was Pandora. For such a famous figure, there's so little on her in the actual Greek written sources. A lot of it was finding things where people were able to infer stuff from Greek art or tracing back mentions from later sources. I did almost think we'd have to abandon it as an episode or incorporate it into something bigger rather than its own episode like it turned out to be.
I would say for me personally, it might have been the Flying Dutchman episode actually, because there's just so little to go by in terms of like reliable academic sources on the topic. I had to resort to some like popular myth books and stuff in the end and have to just like say, I don't know like how reliable any of this is. That was kind of like Beowulf to some extent as well, where there's a very, very small inkling of an actual folkloric thing. And then after that, it's all literary to some extent, although Beowulf's got more actual mythology in it than this does. So yeah, I'd probably say that one.
I had a much easier time of that one.
Ratsy441 asks, when it comes to what the average European/Brit knows of mythology, there is doubtlessly a bias towards Norse, Greco-Roman, and maybe Egyptian mythology. Is there something you wish were more widely known other than these cultures? I'm trying to remember what I said to you when we were discussing this before.
So I'll jump in then with my answer because I said Maori.
Yeah.
I read a lot of books on Maori mythology for dragons, which were really interesting. And it is seeing a big resurgence in Aotearoa these days, and I'd love for that to get more widespread recognition.
Oh, cool. I think I said when we were discussing, I think I would like Anansi to be more widely known, because Anansi's just such a fun character.
Yeah.
Whether it's like the African versions of the myth or it's the actual like Jamaican and other Haitian myths and things like that.
Yeah, and that's also important from a historical perspective as well, I think.
I think those would be useful. I think also it'd be nice to hear more mythology coming out of South America, because we both said, like we were discussing this before, I know like nothing about, say, Inca mythology and things like that, and it would be nice to know those a lot more. Deep Blue Media asks, what was your start in ancient history and mythological research? Was this something you always had an aspiration for, or was it a second love? For me, it's kind of both, is the answer. Like, I basically started getting interest just when I was like 16 years old, being bored in class when I'd already done all my work for like computer class stuff and just like reading random stuff on Wikipedia. Started off like just going for like very basic things like, oh yeah, who was like US president in World War II and things like that, just like trying to flesh out my knowledge. And it just slowly kind of spiraled and grew into a virus from there, basically. So it kind of it was never like the primary thing I was doing in terms of like education or work until about 5-6 years ago because of the YouTube channel. So you could argue it's second love for those purposes, I would say.
Yeah. I think same, a bit of both for me, because for my start with mythology, it was primary school or elementary school for the Americans. I was taught all the, like, kid-friendly versions of Egyptian and Greek gods. One of the subjects in secondary school, so middle school, high school, so that time, was called classical civilization, which is basically a mix of Greek and Roman history, mythology, and literature. I had to drop the subject at 16 because even though it was my best subject, I was doing science for a science career.
So you needed the science subjects.
I had to focus like purely on that. But it was always something I'd read about when I had the time. And then as I got more time and got older, I started reading things more deeply. We talked about mythology a lot. And so, it really just came back into my life in that way.
Yeah. You got a lot more of that stuff during actual schooling. I basically got none of that. I got no ancient history and basically no mythology because, like, I stopped doing history at, I think, 13, 14 or something like that. And it was all like Norman Conquest, World War I, Tudor England was the ones that I got from there.
Yeah. As I was quite lucky that my school did classical history as separate from history, the main subject, which was like Tudor England, World War I, etc. Because I dropped that at 13, but kept up with the Greek and Roman side of things.
Moving on then, Fortress 7 asks, I would love to hear your thoughts on the mythology in the movie Shang-Chi, especially Morris, the fuzzy little god of chaos. I've listened to your dragon episodes probably 50 times at least. Thanks for all the hard work. Neither of us have seen that movie.
No, I have, but I watched on a flight a few years ago.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So my memory's not great. I remember Morris, vaguely. Because, he's a Hundun, which is a Chinese primordial chaos being.
Okay.
And is an example of what the MCU does well of integrating little Easter eggs of real mythology into their movies, because the actual myth of a Hundun wouldn't fit their cosmology at all. But it's really cool that they managed to just sort of put him in there. So that's about as much as I can say on the matter.
Oh, fair enough. Fortress 7 also asks, on a tradition of stuff which I have nothing interesting to say about, do you follow sumo wrestling? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the history of sumo. I do not follow sumo wrestling.
Me neither. I'm very sorry, Fortress 7, that we're letting you down with our answers.
The only person that could have potentially given an answer to that in my family is my brother. I think he follows some of it.
It's something I didn't get a chance to see while I was in Japan. There was so much other cultural stuff that I was focusing on instead. Would love to go back and learn more. Maybe one day, I can hope, but nothing to add at this time, I'm afraid.
Yeah, although as someone who follows like other forms of like professional wrestling and to some extent a little bit of amateur wrestling, MMA and stuff like that, it's good that they're getting more sumo events like on YouTube and stuff like that, because for years it was really hard to get that stuff online, I understand.
Maybe I should check that out then. Maybe that's something for me to do after this.
Yeah. Elizabeth Ford 7263 asks, what is your theory about the widespread occurrence of similar myths, archetypical, diffusion, etc.? I think personally it's because a lot of myths are based in quite common dangers and fears that humanity has. I think also some of it's just like a natural attempt to try to explain the world. Like, how do we get fire? Well, clearly a god must have given us fire for us to have it. Something like that. It seems like quite a natural explanation of like God did it to some extent, although it started off more as gods did it.
Yeah, a lot of cultures did have very similar inputs in terms of the natural world. And so it's a case of trying to fill in the gaps, essentially, because we are so wired to try and understand things.
Yeah.
And when we don't have the methods to investigate properly, we try and fill in the gaps with what we can figure out and using storytelling in that way.
I think so. I think one of the reasons as well is like you get widespread occurrence of certain like mythic creatures and stuff like that is probably because the actual things they're often like occasionally based on certain things that are common throughout the world. Like we're about to do a thing on like werewolves, and the idea of someone turning into a wolf, it seems like a pretty obvious like mental connection to make, because wolves are dangerous predators in terms of like most of human history. For our domesticated animals, they're a threat that you have to deal with, so they represent danger to some extent. But also like we have dogs as well, and the kind of boundary between those two is an interesting thing to think about and talk about. So the idea that then you would have stories of people transforming into wolves or things based off wolves makes sense in that regard.
Yeah.
And similar things for like dragons and other creatures that we've discussed on the podcast. And the final question, Holone3892, Holorn possibly, asks, what is your opinion on the accuracy of reconstructed mythologies of proto-cultures which left no written record? Also, how long does an episode of Mythological take from concept to upload? So we're going to be, I think, talking a little bit about this in the werewolf episode that we're going to be doing in a minute.
I have a short section on Proto-Indo-European culture. So I do cover that in more detail, but I think a lot of the time it reflects the people who are reconstructing more than the cultures they're trying to reconstruct. There's one bad example that comes up in werewolves of that. When done well, we can identify interesting patterns across cultures, but again, that more feeds into how are humans figuring out meaning from the world around them, rather than necessarily saying there is this mythology that was the ancestor of every other mythology.
Yeah. I mean, I look at things like reconstructed mythologies, like, the Proto-Indo-European, stuff like that. I kind of hit that, what I call the expert problem, which is I'm aware that I am not an expert in the slightest about languages and how languages evolve and change over time. So I don't want to do the ignorant thing of just looking and going, it just all sounds like nonsense, because I'm not familiar with the jargon that people use. I had that in science before and turned out to be wrong many times. So instinctively, I don't want to do that. I get that vibe, though, whenever I look at those sort of things where I'm like, we have no archaeological or historical documents whatsoever to back up most of this. So it sounds interesting, but I need more before I can before I would be willing to put any weight to them.
Yeah. So it's worth reading to identify patterns, but also, we're not enough experts to give weight to the real, to whether it was real or not.
Okay, well, that's all the questions. So thank you to everyone who asked them. Thank you to everyone who listened over the last 5 years.
Yeah. Thank you to Charles for putting up with me for 5 years.
Yeah, likewise. And hopefully here's to another 5 years.
Let's hope.
See how it goes. All right. Thank you, folks. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.